Hello and welcome. I'm Helen Atkinson, Senior Editor at SupplyChainBrain. I'm excited to be moderating this webinar today, sponsored by Seegrid, the topic for which is flexible automation and the future of the human workforce. Companies are struggling to strike a balance between the need to increase capacity while facing ongoing labor shortages. And these companies are increasingly turning to automation solutions to address these challenges. But what does this mean for the future of the human workforce? The answer is building an automation strategy that leverages both humans and machines in order to reduce operating costs, create rewarding job opportunities, and deliver impactful results to boost your bottom line. Today, we're going to learn about how automation is more critical than ever for the future of consumer goods manufacturing facilities. We're also going to learn about how autonomous mobile robots help decrease complexity, lower operating costs, and increase productivity, allowing for fast-moving consumer goods companies to stay competitive. We're also going to learn a bit about Seegrid's deep domain expertise and track record of success in helping companies solve challenges. Some of the world's largest consumer goods companies have been helped by them. So thank you for joining us to discuss how humans and machines can work together better. After the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. Please submit questions at any time using the tab at the bottom of your screen. We will not be using people's titles or company names, so go ahead and ask whatever you'd like. If you don't see your question answered during the webinar, please be assured the Seegrid team will reach out to you offline. Right, so let's get to our speakers. Today's first speaker is Dr. Hari Tiruvengada. He is the Senior Director of Product Management at Seegrid. He's responsible for the product vision, strategy, and execution for the entire Seegrid portfolio. Our second speaker is Deb Ercegovic. She is the Director of Strategic Sales at Seegrid and oversees a team of strategic account executives who help companies find and implement automation solutions to address their biggest challenges. Welcome. I believe Harry is going to start us off with a description of what Seegrid does. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Harry.
Well, thank you, Helen, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Appreciate the opportunity to have a chat with you all and share what we've been up to. So thanks for the opportunity again. So as Helen mentioned, Seegrid has been the leading provider and is the leading provider of autonomous mobile robots and enterprise software solutions that maximize material flow. And we do this in distinct ways, one of them being our AMR portfolio, which is the autonomous mobile robot portfolio. We do have a lot of pallet trucks, the tow tractors and lift trucks that are able to move goods from point to point or from distinct locations in order to maximize material flow efficiency. Now, the physical vehicles alone or the trucks or the AMRs alone are not sufficient. You'd have to have enterprise level software that allows you to control or orchestrate these machines and tell them what to do. So Seegrid has been providing a lot of solutions in this space, including enterprise level fleet management solutions and data and analytics-based solutions, which allow us to build, manage, analyze, and optimize these AMRs in a very, very meaningful way. And also, in addition to that, all this is great, but how do you kind of drive adoption of this technology in your workforce? That's where the automation services come into play, where we are able to provide expert analysis, consulting, and ongoing support such that you're able to install these vehicles and be able to apply them to the right job applications or tasks that you're asking these robots to do at your facility, and also provide ongoing support and adoption services as we move forward. So that's wonderful and all. So then it brings us to the next logical question of how does it help us solve the manufacturing industry challenges? So let me kick it off by saying workflow availability issue continues to be a big challenge for CGI industry and manufacturing in a large way. One of the statistics shows that CGI or consumer good industry added just about 12,000 jobs, where manufacturing industry added about 800,000 jobs. That's a stark difference in the amount of jobs that have been added, and that increases the stress level on the workforce availability. And not only that, the workforce is retiring. We have a lot of Gen Y and Gen Z population coming into the workforce, and the previous workforce is retiring at a rapid pace. That creates a huge skill gap in the types of tasks that these workers are able to do, especially if you're doing a lot of other tasks and you're multitasking within the facility. And lastly, speaking, workforce wages have been going up. There's about a 1.2% increase year over year in wages between 2017 to 2022. And not to mention the pandemic has accelerated the wages even further. So that creates a huge stress level and challenges on the workforce availability and access to the workforce. Deb, what do you think about the safety and sustainability aspect of things?
Well, clearly, it's great to be here, Harry. Thanks so much. And clearly, safety is a key initiative for factories today. So companies are looking at automation to eliminate accidents and incidents that they see in factories today. As we know, you just mentioned companies are having trouble hiring and retaining employees. Imagine if they're known as an unsafe factory. That just further exasperates the problem. So safety initiatives are what we hear from our customers as the #1 priority to make sure that those are eliminated. What we see is companies looking to really augment automation for those jobs that are unsafe, for example, forklift drivers. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide, but really, if you have a complete automation solution that includes AMRs, companies can then protect their employees and their workforce from safety incidents occurring in the future. So in addition, sustainability, it's a key initiative for Seegrid. It's a key initiative that we hear from a lot of our customers across the board. So how can we focus on sustainability and green initiatives? We're working closely with our design team to make sure that we're designing in sustainability. And so that means working closely with the battery suppliers and battery vendors, for example. So our AMRs run today on hydrogen fuel cells and also rechargeable lithium ion batteries. That's key to be able to achieve those initiatives in the future. So another focus is data, correct, Harry? So if you want to dive a little bit into the data, why is that important? Why do companies look for data today to support what they're doing?
Well, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked. As you pointed out, there's been several installations at site, but how do you know that they are working the way they're supposed to be working? Data is a key ingredient to that. You cannot have opinions, you cannot have factoids, you need to have data to say, well, this is what is happening at the facility. As you learn more about the facility, you come upon many different facets of the data, such as how is my fleet doing? How am I doing today? I need to know comparisons as to how am I doing compared to yesterday, compared to another shift, compared to another operation, or compared to another site. So you're able to look at all these different comparisons and optimize what is this site doing or what is the other site doing so that we can actually adopt those better practices and avoid the poor practices so we can focus on improving the status quo. And finally, let's be honest and real, because every project is an ROI-based project too, right? So you have to know, am I getting the ROI for my investment that I'm making? So data provides that key visibility and insight into the operations, optimization, and all the other functionalities that you can do as you move forward with these installations. So that brings me to another question. So how does that allude to the ROI or the operating margins? Could you speak to that?
Well, and it's different today than it was 2 years ago. We have a pandemic that we're dealing with. Supply chain issues are causing problems. You mentioned workforce availability. All of these fluctuations are really, really shrinking companies' operating margins. It costs more today to bring in components, to bring in sub-assemblies into the factories. Companies are facing expedite charges, et cetera, as the supply chains continue to stretch. So not only that, but once they bring the goods into the factory to be able to do their manufacturing, all of a sudden the cost of labor is much higher. So it also costs more now to actually build the products. So the bottom line is the companies that are turning to automation are improving their bottom line across the board. And they're becoming much more competitive in relation to their competition. So those that see the value of automation are quickly recognizing the benefits. So, if we take a look at the next slide, how does automation help overcome these challenges in manufacturing? I mentioned safety briefly, but just to put this in perspective for those that are listening, there's 97,000 forklift incidents or accidents that occur every year that result in either injury or a fatality. So that's a huge number, 97,000 per year. It's extremely significant, not only from a personal safety perspective, your workforce, retaining your workforce, but also the cost of the safety after the incident occurs. So you can approach this two ways. You can either design an automation strategy into your factory, if you're building a greenfield factory, and we're working with several companies today that are looking out a year, 2 years, 3 years in advance. And how do you design that into your factory from the ground up? Or you can put it into your factory after it's already been built. And so those are the challenges that we're hearing from our companies that we're working with today. How do they quickly implement automation strategies within their factory? So thankfully, and we'll talk about this in an upcoming slide, but thankfully the Seegrid AMRs can quickly be trained within a couple of day period while the factory is running. So there's a misconception today that automation is a threat to the workforce, when in reality, the reverse is true. Companies who embrace this technology are actually able to create jobs, and they're able to help their employees and retain their employees more effectively. So when you have jobs that are safer, more engaging, less labor intensive, and more interesting, the employees want to stay. And that becomes a very, very important differentiator against competition. So as we look at this, if you take the jobs that are not value-added positions or not safe positions, and you augment those positions with automation, then it becomes a win-win for both parts of it. And so that goes right into the productivity aspect of this. So if we take a look at the productivity, when you're training an employee on a forklift, for example, that takes time, and your productivity within the factory quickly declines. It ramps up slowly over a period of time. So it takes roughly 2 to 3 days to train a Seegrid AGV AMR, and we can do it while production is running. We don't have to stop the production lines. And so when you look at it that way, your productivity maintains at a steady state throughout the factory. In addition, one of the most beneficial areas of the factory is having parts to come to line when they're supposed to come to line. And so when you're dealing with robots delivering those parts to line, they're not taking breaks, they're not going on vacation, there's no fluctuation in it. So it becomes very predictable across the factory. So with that, Harry, how does data help that? How does that granularity and visibility, how does that help within that?
Boy, before I answer that question, I got to say 97,000 seems a lot. That's excessive.
It's a lot, that's for sure.
That's got to play into downtime for sure. So as you're kind of thinking about these, that also has to play a lot into employee retention. But as you mentioned earlier, data is key to understanding these incidents. Are these system induced? Are these induced by environmental conditions? Are these induced because of lack of training? Are these induced by some other factor that we do not understand yet? That is a huge amount of the unknown unknowns that we have today in a manufacturing environment. So we have to be able to say, this is the root cause, and here's what is causing this factor to happen, and here's a repetitive pattern that we can overcome or control through control mechanisms that we put in place, training, tooling, protocol, process, etc., to allow us to make this much more effective and efficient. That also kind of plays a lot into flexibility and scalability in a big way, I would suppose. So, that brings us to the next topic of, how does that allow us to scale and be flexible while we're implementing these operations? So as Deb pointed out, labor shortage, for those who are listening, continues to be a big problem, and retention is a big part of that. Now, the AMRs do not require any infrastructure to do their jobs. So that actually creates a lot of flexibility, because now you're not disrupting the jobs of the humans who are actually working in these environments, and you're able to work side by side in a very safe and efficient manner. So that's a big plus in my mind. That also brings another topic, which is, are we able to take these AMRs and quickly deploy them to other scenarios within the facility? That's a big bonus, because you can't have bespoke solutions such as conveyors or automation, which are fixed automation that just focuses on doing one task and one task alone. Because let's be real, manufacturing is a very, very flexible organism. There's a lot of changes that happen on a day-to-day basis. So your system has to be flexible to adapt to those changing conditions in those environments. And that's a big part of the deal. So,
Harry, can I interrupt for just a second? We have, along that line, we have one customer today that changes on average 5 times a month. And so they're able to quickly deploy their robots and retrain their robots simply by driving them through the factory. So that flexibility is key to that customer to be able to accomplish those goals. If you're using tape guided or wire guided type of automation, you don't have that flexibility. So it makes a huge difference.
That is true. That is very true. Because the moment you dig up, the ROI goes out the door. So you can't really have that. So that brings me to the last topic here on this slide, which is, how do you keep your operations flowing with visibility into actionable analytics? As I pointed out earlier, when you implement these solutions, you have to side by side implement a data analytics solution to know if you're getting the true value out of the system that you've implemented, and what areas require more improvements, et cetera. So I'll kick this off, and Deb, I'd love to hear your perspective on this as well.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that we've been debating and talking about and implementing in our data solutions is we got to have tiered levels of visibility. So what matters to an operation floor supervisor might be different from what matters to a site supervisor or to a data analyst who's looking at these solutions. So in our perspective, there's at least 3 layers of information that is required. One being what is happening with our fleet today, or the AMRs, I should say, a fleet of AMRs today. Because these things don't work in singles. We have a group of AMRs doing coordinated tasks, right? So that fleet performance is absolutely vital. So having visibility into that provides floor operators or supervisors with the necessary data so they can augment the human performance with machines that are capable of supplementing that human performance. The other part of this has to be adoption, right? So we implement these, and many a times, this is one of the pitfalls that a lot of folks make, which is, well, we implemented this, naturally it's got to be adopted, right? Mm-hmm. Probably not. So there's got to be meticulous thought put into adoption as a key driver, because what works today may not work tomorrow because of changing conditions. Maybe the person who's cobotting or working together with these robots doesn't have sufficient training. Maybe there's a new job application that they're deploying into. All these kind of factor into adoption. So having a really key insight into adoption's got to be a big deal. And lastly, efficiencies are important, because at the end of the day, it's all about the material flow. It's all about streamlining, because it's not about the robots. It's about the robots enabling the material flow to happen, right? So that's what we're talking about. What are your thoughts on that, Deb?
No, and that's a great point. So I would look at efficiencies. The data that helps you to understand the efficiencies is the key part of this whole thing. So as I'm looking at this, is this the best train path for my robot? Is this the best material flow in my facility? Without the data, you really can't understand that. So once we may go in and train a route, and then as we're looking at and the factory changes, maybe that's not the best trained route any longer. The data will pull that out. And so then we can quickly go in and make those changes. So it brings it all the way full circle back to the flexibility. So I agree 100%, Harry.
That's fantastic. So let's talk something different. So what does this mean when companies are choosing to do AMR? So what are some benefits in your mind that arise as a result of using that?
Well, again, it increases the efficiency and the flexibility. It allows them to make changes to their factory. So they don't all of a sudden, they're not locked into a single space. Well, we can't change this line. We can't move this. We can't add to it because we have a tape or a wire guided line running through here. or we can't flex with demand. As we see today, demand has gone through the roof for a lot of these companies and they're unable to keep up with it. So if you have a very flexible factory that you can quickly change routes to move material to a different location, it really opens the door to possibilities for the company. Why don't you take the next one, talking about the risks such as downtime and errors, costs, etc.
Oh, this is my favorite one. So when you talk about downtime, errors, additional costs, and safety incidents, this is what companies are measured on, right? So we have to report incidents to OSHA and all these other, things that happen at the site, not to mention the additional paperwork that goes with it. Fun stuff, right? So you have to be very, very mindful of that. Also, downtime is a pretty big deal because at the end of the day, a disruption in a manufacturing facility is one of the biggest reasons why there's work stoppage. You have to have steady flow of materials, steady flow of assembly lines, steady flow of all the other tasks that are happening. Once there's disruption to that steady flow, everything stops. And then to reset that and really kind of start it over takes a lot of time, energy, and effort. So we really have to be mindful of that. Errors are another big cause of, ROI depletion. So, focusing on having robots do the jobs and do it in a predictable manner and repetitively is a big deal because robots are told what they do and they do it in a repetitive manner. And they're really good at doing that. And then additional costs associated with, all the other unpredictable nature of the tasks with human tasks is a big deal as well. So I believe that there's a huge amount of uncertainty and risk reduction because of the predictable nature of automation that we can deploy. What are your thoughts on day-to-day goals? How does that impact them?
Well, so companies, when you're looking at the amount of product to ship or the amount of product that you can ship at any given time, you have to start with a goal for an hour, and then a goal for a shift, and then a goal for a day. And then it gets into the goal for a month. So then you can be able to predict and plan what you can do. If you know at any given point, I'm going to have X number of parts delivered to the line for every single hour, then it becomes very easy to predict to your customers. If I have X number of parts to the line, I can manufacture this amount, and this is what I can ship at the end of the day. It really helps streamline that process. And that's what why a lot of companies are turning to automation for sure. And then it goes all the way back to data. So, if we look at data, as you said several times, like the data drives the factory. You have to have this data. You have to know, am I moving material efficiently and effectively, or is there a better way to do it? Where are my bottlenecks within the factory? And so that's really what the data brings out. Wouldn't you agree?
I certainly mostly agree. This is one of the biggest things. Like, you cannot optimize what you can't see or know.
Correct.
So an important part of this play, right? So we have to know what we're looking at before we start optimizing. So that is a big deal. So what are your thoughts on the future?
Well, it says here on the slide, the future is here. So we have made such huge changes over the last 2 to 3 years because of the pandemic and now the war, all the supply chain issues that companies are facing today. So, a lot of our customers have said that if it weren't for the AMRs from Seegrid, they wouldn't be able to keep up. And so when you are faced with companies that have safety issues or safety incidents, they're combating employee retention issues, they have to turn to AMRs. And that is, it's been great for us as far as working with these companies to really solve problems and drive their solutions within their factories. It really, the two, when you take an AMR and couple it with the employees, that synergy has been the most cost-effective solution for most companies today.
Fantastic. So are we ready for some question and answers and bring Helen back on?
I think that sounds great.
Hello, hi. Yes, let's get to some Q&A. Thanks so much, Harry and Deb. That was a very interesting presentation. I think we learned a lot about how we can focus on using AMRs to do repetitive tasks like forklift operations, perhaps, and keep human labor for more complex and decision-making tasks, and make those jobs more interesting. So now we're going to get to some questions from the audience. Once again, please submit your questions using the tab at the bottom of your screen. We'll not be using people's titles or company names, so you should feel free to ask anything you like. If you don't see your question answered during the webinar, please be assured the Seegrid team will reach out to you offline. Actually, I'm going to start off with my own question, having watched your presentation. Today, it seems that automation from one company has to operate separately from automation from another company. How do we get to a place where different automation solutions can exist and actually work together?
So that's a great question. I'll kick that off, Helen. There's been a lot of discussion about factory interoperability. And quite simply, what that is how does someone that's driving a factory or running a factory, how can they tell where all of their automation is within a factory? Today on the market, there's nothing that ties a Seegrid AMR with company X and company Y, different types of automation. And so that's becoming a key focus. And we're working very closely with some of the top companies that are driving these initiatives. So at the end of the day, you'll see a Seegrid AMR feed into a data product of a higher level company that will also receive the data feed from other automation companies as well. That's really where we're headed to as in the future. What do you think, Harry?
That's a great response. And I would add to that by saying, at the end of the day, we exist in an environment or in a world where there's lots of choices, a lot of options. We all have to play nice with each other. And that's where we add the benefit, right? At the end of the day, ROI is key. In the customer's point of view, there's going to be a lot of existing robots in their facility, or maybe other robots that do other tasks as well, because no one company in this world is large enough to provide all the robotic solutions for all the companies in all ways. So we have to be mindful of that and play to our strengths. So interoperability is a key to delivering that ROI for our customer, where we are able to relegate these tasks in meaningful ways so that we can reduce the delay, the disruption, the downtime, the errors, et cetera, that we were talking about earlier. At the end of the day, if we can do those mundane tasks using robotic automation and just have humans focus on the more important decision-making tasks of running the day-to-day operations, or perhaps even focusing on their larger business objectives, then that's a big win for a robotic solution as well as the humans. And that's what we're focused on. So.
Right, great. Thank you. Those are great answers. So I want to drill into a little bit of a technical question here. How do you compare the speed of operation of an AMR to a manual operator? Do you have an average rate, or how much faster are robots than humans, or does it depend on the task?
Well, it depends on the task, and it depends on the human for sure.
Right.
The Seegrid AMRs run approximately 4 miles an hour through the factories. And so it clearly depends on the human. If you're in some cases, there are tasks where a human has to pull a cart that might weigh 200 pounds. Certainly that's going to move much slower, right? And it depends on the human and the strength of the human. So I don't know how you can say that. It depends on really so many outside factors. Harry, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to give a more philosophical response.
Perfect.
This goes back to, I know folks are familiar, but there's a list called machines are better at and men are better at, right? Nobel list for those who are listening. And it was created by Jans Rasmussen, where he identifies 10 different tasks. And then it goes from the top being the ones that are very, very well suited for machine-based automation, the ones that are well suited for humans and human automation. The point of that list was that decision-making, anything that requires cognitive work, is actually better suited for humans. Anything that requires physical, repetitive work is well suited for automation. Now, we can always apply a lens to that, saying, does that include dexterity or dexterous tasks that need to be performed? What we're talking about here is reducing transportation time. At the end of the day, that's a lean waste in factories. So if we can take that out, that actually hugely reduces the time required and makes it predictable in a meaningful way. Now, there are upstream benefits as well, because now upstream and downstream benefits, because now you can make those tasks predictable. So if you have some jobs planned around, well, this round trip time should be 6 minutes. Well, guess what? The robot's not taking a smoke break, right? So it's kind of doing that task over and over again. It becomes more predictable. So these are the things that actually kill, material flow in a large facility. So what I'm going to respond is by saying that, we have to be very mindful when we apply automation and focus on the ones that actually create meaningful impact at the end of the day and make humans superhuman.
Right, thank you. That's great. I wanted to ask you, I think this is quite an interesting question, that investment in, you're talking about how automation retains employees and creates jobs. But is there a sense in which investing in automation takes away from the amount of money you have to spend on labor? Or does it create more? I mean, it's not really a zero-sum game, is it? If you're trying to increase efficiency.
No, that's a great question, and I'll kick it off because I'm dealing with some of this right now. So if companies are making decisions whether or not to invest in automation, they're going to start with an ROI analysis. And so what we've seen recently, because of the increase in the labor costs and the cost of the supply chain, the cost of training, all of these factors are playing in, and honestly, the cost of turnover. Companies are losing employees very, very, very quickly. That negatively impacts their ROI. So if you look at the cost of automation, we're seeing somewhere in the range of a 6 to 8 month ROI on the Seegrid AGVs. So it's significant. So as you put money into the automation and eliminate the less safe jobs, then you have more money to spend on other areas within the factory, including employee retention.
Well, Deb, I'm going to jump in and reduce it to practice here a little bit. So, let's go to a practical example. Water spiders, very common task, very clear task that's often, used in assembly lines and manufacturing facilities, right? Usually there's one person that's assigned to multiple locations, and they have to be able to fill these or replenish these items on the manufacturing floor line. Now, imagine if that were automated. Now you can actually have a predictable replenishment strategy, which actually keeps your line flowing. So that's what we're talking about. There's usually a hidden cost, which people do not see when you're trying to automate. What does this automation mean to your top line and bottom line when you look at it as a whole solution rather than these individual segments that you're trying to automate is a big deal. I think it's important to kind of think about it more from a system and solution perspective rather than just AMR speeds and feeds.
Right, that's great. Yeah, it's more of a holistic view that you need to take about these costs. Very interesting. So here's another great question. How common is it this goes to the flexibility issue. How common is it to redeploy AMRs in a facility between different areas or operations? And what are the typical steps involved and the time required?
I can kick this one off, Deb, if you don't mind. And
Perfect.
Please jump in. I think the first step is, scoping. What are you actually dealing with, right? So is this the right task? Again, I point back to the Mamba list and say, is this the right type of automation? So we have a clear idea of the types of jobs that robots are well suited for, the application that we're well suited for. And as I pointed out earlier in our consulting services, this is one of the specialties and the secret sauce that we have at Seegrid. We have trained application engineers who are able to seek out the true spaces where we need to automate. So that's the first step. And then, once you have that, then of course, none of these things will move forward if you don't have a clear ROI. And that is important. So we have our proprietary ROI calculator, which allows us to understand how does all this fit into the big picture for the organization. Again, goes back to that holistic view of the solution, not just the AMR speeds and feeds, right? From there, we have to be able to develop the application, build the application, train the application. And that's a very, very short task because we have the right tooling, the training, and the tool sets for us to be able to implement these in a very, very seamless manner. As Deb pointed out, we're in and out in most of these scenarios, and that's very, very helpful. And not only that, we actually pay a lot of attention to things that happen after the installation is done. That's where true adoption kicks in, because we have dedicated forces of people who actually provide both support in the field as well as remote support and ongoing support through our customer success teams that allow us to drive the adoption, the training, the tooling required so that our customers are empowered to run these seamlessly without any fear or guilt associated with that. So that would be my response. So Deb, what do you think?
So I'll answer it from a practical perspective. If you're asking, how often does this happen? It happens a lot.
Right.
So a lot of times factories change. They're very dynamic. And so, you're going to have a situation where all of a sudden we're not running this line. This line is stagnant. So therefore we no longer need to deliver material there, but we do need to deliver material over to this line over here. It happens a lot. And so in some cases, customers are so comfortable that they can retrain the routes themselves. It's very simple. In other cases, their safety objectives within the factory allow us to come in and retrain it for them. And so that's part of the ongoing support that we provide. So we're in constant contact with those that have purchased to make sure that the AMRs are being utilized in the best way forward. And quite honestly, those that are using our Fleet Central data analytics platform, we can tell whether or not they're using them, and we can preempt, hey, do you want us to come out and retrain this for you? Is this something that you're comfortable doing yourself? Should we look at a different application? And so we can really start to drive the utilization to a much higher level.
That's fantastic. So you can actually proactively identify and suggest areas where it might be better to deploy the AMRs somewhere else.
Absolutely. So we can take a look at it and say, it looks like this specific AMR is only being run 20% of the time. Maybe it's only being run on first shift. Is that okay for you? Or would you rather have it utilized somewhere else in your factory where it could be utilized 90% of the time? And so those are the type of conversations that we have on a very regular basis with our customers to make sure that they're happy with their purchase and they're seeing the ROI that they have expected.
And a big way of kind of addressing that is through our data. So if we didn't have the data, we wouldn't be able to make those recommendations.
Right, great. Well, that's fantastic. I have another question here. Do you have automation other than AMR, for example, AI?
Harry, do you want to take that, or would you like me to field that one?
Sure. Why don't you kick it off, Deb, and I can jump in more.
So we have a fleet of robots that are what we call our AMRs, correct? So, but in those robots, the way that they work is actually with our Seegrid IQ, which is where the AI comes into play. So it is key for us to be able to automate our robots and to make them move and do the tasks that they need to do. So quite simply, yes, it's what drives the robots today within the facilities.
And I would add that, the Seegrid IQ has been developed over 3 decades. So there's quite a bit of impressive technology in there, from sensing to perception to AI, which actually drives the brain of the robot. So that's a big deal. And that's where some of the secret sauce is, because we're able to address a variety of different scenarios as a result of having that technology in there, which is not just relegated to one particular form factor. We have all kinds of cool things in there.
Great, fantastic. Another, hang on, I'm getting so many questions here. Another question about, just to go back to that integration question again, have you integrated with any of the top tier WMS offerings?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a clear part of it. So we integrate, we have APIs that can integrate with different parts of the factories. Harry, I don't know if you want to go into any details on that, or we can answer that offline directly.
Yeah, I think you answered it pretty well, Deb. We have capabilities to do integrations with our WMS or MES systems. We've been doing it for quite some time. The details of that can be shared offline, but certainly we have those capabilities in our wheelhouse.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think APIs are in all of our futures. So here's a sort of broader question. Where does CapEx investing and flexible material handling automation fit? How do those things fit together for your customers typically? Larry, so maybe.
If I'm
sorry, Deb, please take that.
No, I'm just trying to understand the question. Can you ask it one more time, please?
Where does investing and flexible material handling automation fit in to the picture? I think I'm talking.
So it's a very important part of it. So companies that are investing in flexible material handling operation are seeing an increase in their bottom line. They're seeing employee retention improve. They're seeing safety incidents go down. I mean, it's all part of what we're offering today. So that investment, if I'm understanding the question correctly, pays back long-term. It's not, it just pays back the first year. It pays back year 5 when they're still using them.
Yes, and just to add a bit more detail to that response, automation in manufacturing has to be flexible by definition because manufacturing environments change a lot. What is today in a manufacturing cell might not be the same tomorrow. There's got to be quite a bit of flexibility in that. If you look to traditional forms of automation, such as conveyors, they're hard to fit in those environments. And to move an investment like that is a significant task, or even to add lines or these magnetic tapes on the floor is a significant cost, not to mention the cost, but it's also significant cost from the disruption that it causes to the workforce. So I think, having flexible automation and automation strategies, both from a AMR perspective and a software and data perspective, is critical for the success of any teams that are trying to deploy automation solutions in those environments. So I would say it is part of the DNA, and we have to understand how to apply that in a meaningful way.
Great, thank you. So here's an interesting question. Are there any mistakes or red flags to avoid when investing in mobile robot technology?
I'll take that one. Yes, absolutely. And one of the key pieces, it's one thing to invest in the technology, but it's another to make sure that you have the right strategy and that you know how this is going to be deployed. So we've heard horror stories that people have invested in automation and it showed up on their dock and they thought, oh, now what? And so clearly when you're investing in it, you have to do a lot of upfront work. Before you ever make the purchase, you should know exactly how it's going to work, where it's going to go in the factory, what the training consists of, what the service plan consists of. All of these things you should be working with your automation company ahead of time. And then secondly, and more importantly, I would say, is how is the factory going to adopt it? And that's the biggest point of automation not being used today, is when the factory doesn't adopt the automation. So it's a key critical part, and that's where we tend to spend a lot of our time. Our robots, as I mentioned, get deployed very, very quickly within the factory. So days while production is running, it doesn't take a long time. I don't want you to think that we stop right there. That's where the fun begins, because then we really start working with the employees all the shifts to make sure that they're adopting it, they like it, they're embracing this technology, and they're utilizing it the way that it should be utilized. When you hear companies say automation doesn't work, it's typically because it hasn't been adopted.
Right, interesting. Wow.
If I may add one more point to that, Helen, I think Deb's response was awesome. But a big part of this is, you need to know and talk to your customers ahead of time and be very, very transparent about what it can or cannot do and what kind of strategies that they have to put in place alongside with the strategies that you're putting in place, right? So for example, championing that program is a pretty big deal. We've had tons of success with customers who have actually put in a champion, a single point owner who is able to coordinate these amongst their other facilities with safety, with maintenance, with all these other, cross departments to actually bring that robot to life and provide ongoing continuity to those who are looking to use this on a regular basis, because that's a big part of the deal. And what we do is we have our champion program, which is driven by our customer success team, and really, really is a big part of avoiding those pitfalls or disappointments, if you will, when you're doing this automation.
Right. Yeah. That's a great point to make. So I have another great question here from the audience. Do you have dynamic routing of your AMR fleet based on real-time data, or do you set routes at the beginning of the project? How flexible is that?
Well, I'll take that one, Deb, if you want to jump in, please do. Sure. So dynamic routing means many things to many folks. So I want to be very clear on the definition of what we mean by dynamic routing. So if we're talking about dynamic routing being, hey, I go to an obstacle, I turn around, I go this way, and then I turn around, I go that way, that can be dynamic routing, but the underlying question is that actually helping your material flow or not? Because at the end of the day, it's about being predictable in routes that you can actually drive long hauls in all these different scenarios. You have to be able to do that. But if there's an obstacle in your path, can you avoid that obstacle and get back to your regular path? That's an important, fascinating problem. Now, that problem can be inverted when you're looking at a goods to line type operation where you're dealing with a lot of obstacles. There you can do some 5S around it to overcome that problem. There's a lot of challenges associated with that because, humans like to put things everywhere, just like, my kids do. So, it's really nice to see that, but it's not really helpful when you're trying to run a really good operation. So at the end of the day, what I would say is the technology that we have today or are inventing and putting into our Seegrid IQ that Deb was talking about is actually helping us get to all those core scenarios, such as obstacle avoidance and other things in the future. But that is where the bread and butter is. The key is to be predictable and be able to go off path when you need to, but do get back on the path so you can repeat that material flow on an ongoing basis. And that's what I would say is beneficial for most of our customers that we have seen. So that's where it gives you predictable ROI.
Great, thank you. So I got a larger picture question here. The pandemic, the beastly pandemic, can be seen as a stress test for the supply chain overall. How can advancing our technologies and robotics specifically help prepare us for the future? Hari, why don't you take that first?
Oh, I will. It's one of my favorites. I'm glad that you asked. I was hoping you would ask that.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, let's be truthful, because 2 years ago, nobody anticipated these things to happen, right? At the end of the day, pandemic just hit us from nowhere, and we were totally unprepared for what was about to happen. I remember when I actually came back from Modex and hurriedly picked up my computer from my desk and went back home because we were all working from home for the most part. But that also created a lot of unexpected consequences for facilities and sites that were dealing with that. They still had to produce, they still had to deal with balancing or increasing capacity while facing a labor challenge because people were sick, right? So how do you do that? I cannot imagine a world where you can't do that with just humans alone. You have to have some form of automation that allows you to do that. Now, you could always say, well, we could automate with some other technologies, such as the large CapEx investments with conveyance and things like that. That's great, but that does take time, right? So, and that also is immovable in some context, because once it's done, it's done, it's for a fixed layout. And to change it requires a lot of time, energy, and effort. And that's where I think, being prepared is about anticipating and being flexible and scalable with your solutions. And what AMRs or intelligent automation solution or mobile automation solutions provide is that level of scalability and flexibility so that you can tackle these problems going forward. So you're actually future-proofing yourself. You're not thinking about, how do I react to this? You're getting more proactive with your automation solution. And that's how I would respond to that solution, that question.
Great. Deb, how did we pass the stress test with automation?
If you think about this, because of the pandemic, a lot of things are changing within manufacturing today. So we started heading in this direction slightly before the pandemic, but companies are starting to onshore instead of offshore products. And so they're bringing the manufacturing closer to the US. And by doing that is fantastic. However, we already have a labor shortage. And so we're facing two different issues. Number one, how can I manufacture something with the employees that I have? And number two, how can I do it cost effectively and compete to those people that have offshore solutions? And so automation has to play part of that. If you can eliminate the unsafe jobs in the factories and do it with something that gives you an ROI in 6 months, that's where companies are turning. There's going to be these stresses we see are going to be continuing for the next couple of years. They're not going away anytime in the future.
Wow. So, I mean, it's really a way of making onshoring possible, in fact.
Absolutely. You have to do it. There's, some of the factories that we're hearing that are being built, the number of people that they plan to employ, those people aren't available today. And so the cost of the labor is going to increase. It has to be a solution where you're utilizing both automation and manual labor.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Well, we're running a little tight on time, so I want to move to a final question for both of you. What role do people play when it comes to automation? This is the big question. Does automation replace or supplement humans? Deb, I'd like to hear your answer first.
It goes along with what we were just talking about, Helen. They have to supplement. People aren't going away. Automation has to be there to provide additional resources for companies. Automation should be there to do the jobs that aren't safe within companies, to help reduce the safety incidents. That's the role that automation plays, but quite simply, you have to have an engaged workforce working alongside with the automation to have a good success strategy. And the companies that are doing that today are seeing an increase in their productivity. They're seeing reduced safety incidents, and their bottom line, quite honestly, is looking much better. So that would be my take on it. Harry, I don't know what you think, how you would respond to it.
That's a great response. I'd be hard pressed to top that, but I will provide another quick response to that. I think of this as what happened to us as humans when the mobile phones came into place, the smartphones, right? Until then, we had all these different flip phones and other things that were there. These were bespoke, but then the whole iPhone scenario changed our world in a very, very different way. Now we cannot possibly imagine a situation where you don't have that on you in person. You're really roaming around with a mini computer. I think that has improved the quality of life for us. It has changed it in a very, very meaningful way, so that we're not wondering about how do we do these tasks if that thing was not there in our pockets, right? So that's a big deal. The automation akin to that, right? So we're able to improve quality of life. We talked about employee retention. We talked about morale. We talked about a lot of things where it may seem counterintuitive now, but as we kind of adopt and engage these automation, we can relegate those mundane, repetitive, dangerous, hard, arduous tasks to these machines, so that we can actually elevate the quality of life for humans and focus them on different tasks. I think that's where the magic lies. It's the same thing that happened with buggy whips when the automotives came in, right? So they went away, but the nature of their jobs that just changed, but it still is a big compliment to what they're doing today. So I think automation is here to stay, and it is a great complement and a supplement to human force. I would say it is what will help us turn humans into superhumans.
Right, so we're giving everyone superpowers. I like that.
We are.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much to Harry and Deb from Seegrid. That was a really interesting conversation. And then a special thanks to everyone who attended for participating. And we had some great questions. Thank you so much. I think we've learned a lot about how automation can work in manufacturing operations, and particularly the human factor. So we had a lot of questions today, as I mentioned, and we'll be answering the ones we didn't get to with you offline. You're also going to get an email later with a link to view the webinar on demand or share with other people. And as well, we'll send some contact information for Seegrid if you have more questions. Thank you so much to everyone for your participation. Stay safe, stay happy, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Helen.